Why identify 1973 as the worst year in modern Arab history? Why not 1916 with the Sykes-Picot Agreement that split the Arab world into colonialist mandates? Why not 1948 with the Al-Nakba when the Zionist nation of Israel was established and that saw the expulsion of so many Palestinians? Or even more recently, why not 2001 with 9/11 when Arabs became the geopolitical target of the sole superpower, the United States? Why? Well, because inherently Arabs believe that 1973 was the best year in modern Arab history. And it's with this divergence of reality that leads me to state that 1973 was indeed the worst. So what happened in 1973 that presents a case for its singling out as the worst? Two events closely linked with each other but with severely different and independent consequences took place. The first was the October War, also known as the Yom Kippur War, the last Arab-Israeli war on the 6th of October 1973. While the second event was merely 10 days later when an OPEC oil embargo took effect and greatly impacted the economies of the Western world. Let's go through a quick synopsis on each of these events. The October War was an almost 3-week-long affair that involved Israel and a coalition of 9 Arab states, but mainly fought on the Arab side by Egyptian and Syrian forces. The war included a surprise attack by the Egyptians and Syrians on 2 fronts. And the biggest shock was the Egyptians' exploits in recapturing part of Sinai, lands they had lost to the Israelis in the embarrassing 1967 Six-Day War and recaptured with the ingenious use of flotilla bridges and water jets to overcome the Israeli defenses. Initial success for the Arabs was shattered within a week as Israel gradually recovered from being on their back foot. This shift in momentum was further emboldened by the United States' aggressive support of Israel. Over the course of the next week, the Americans had airlifted over $2.2 billion worth of military materiel that saw a major upsurge of Israeli geographic gains and even newer infiltration into Egyptian lands, especially around the town of Ismailia. With the situation becoming more dire for the Arabs, a ceasefire was agreed on October 25th, with both sides of the war losing territory to each other. Most Arabs consider the October War a victory for themselves. But to be honest, at best, for the Arabs, one could label it as a tie, where no one won and no one lost. But for Arabs, regardless of the details, this was a moral victory. Even though only initially, they were able to surprise, outmaneuver, and overcome the odds against the more powerful Israelis. Were it not for the unrelenting support of the United States, the outcome might have been very different. The second event, the oil embargo, was actually a consequence of the October War, and more specifically a response to the United States' unconditional and biased involvement in its support of Israel. A week after the start of the war, the US President Nixon authorized a strategic airlift delivering weapons to replenish Israeli losses. Upon this move, an OPEC summit agreed to cut back monthly oil production by 5% to convince the United States to remain outside the war. Further Israeli pressure and war demands led to more requests for an additional $850 million worth of arms. Yet surprisingly, Nixon would submit to Congress the consignment of $2.2 billion. Such outlandish favoritism didn't sit well with the Arab leadership, and within 2 days, the Arab nations boycotted entirely the supply of their petroleum to the United States and other European nations. The cost of all petroleum products skyrocketed, initially doubling, then tripling, and so on. Lasting 6 months, the embargo led to a global recession and increased tensions between Western nations who blamed the United States for its unilateral yet detrimental actions. Arabs view the embargo as the first time in modern Arab history when its leaders strong-armed one of the strongest nations of the world at the time, the United States. A moment in time when peace was struck and policy was applied in a more even-handed manner by those who had the power to influence the outcome of things, because the Arabs united and agreed to face such injustice. Both these events are perceived extremely positively by Arabs today. Arabs believe that these successes are based on an Arab unity and coordination that had been missing earlier on the geopolitical stage. Arabs were able to act and achieve results and success against a common enemy on military, political, and economic stages. For the first time in modern Arab memory, strength in numbers, well-coordinated planning, and courageous decisiveness provided a general sense and feeling of both power and relevance within the global stage. Such an event as the October War gave Arabs the hope that the defeat of Israel was not an impossibility as had previously been believed. A little better unity, preparation, and coordination could get the job done. Arabs could also now hope that they were the owners of their own destiny, that they could achieve what was not even contemplated before, standing up to superpowers and making them blink since they now owned a precious weapon like no other: economic influence. And I guess that's why this year for Arabs is so great. It's filled with hope. Hope that they could be something that they never were before, to be seen, and to be, more importantly, respected. And this is where in hindsight one has to ask the question, could these two events even be labeled as victories? Yes, they for sure are feel-good stories, even if you ignore the final outcome of the October War. The Arabs, especially Egypt, did indeed manage to gain much respect regarding their military abilities. But if we look at 1973 as a trigger point, we can clearly see the subsequent actions and policies that both the United States, its Western allies, and Israel strategically initiated that would see the Arab world fall into what they considered its rightful place: chaos. Two quotes can summarize the takeaways and shifting mindsets towards these two events from both the Israeli and American vantage points. For Israel, Ariel Sharon, a general during the war, would claim, "We're a generation that settles the land, and without the steel helmet and the cannon's fire, we will not be able to plant a tree and build a home." The following year, Sharon would launch the ultra-Zionist Likud party that would eventually claim long-term power after the resignation of the wartime Israeli government and its leader, Golda Meir. On the American front, one of Kissinger's first reactions to the total embargo during a meeting with the US Secretary of Defense was, "Ridiculous that the civilized world is held up by 8 million savages. Can't we overthrow one of the sheikhs just to show that we can do it?" And again, as the embargo concluded, Kissinger would announce and launch Project Independence, a mission by the United States to achieve an energy self-sufficiency. Never again would Israel allow for powerful Arab nations to flank its borders. Never again would the United States allow for any nation, especially the Arabs, in controlling the most vital of natural resources, oil. And these two mindsets would influence regional events in the Arab world over the next 3 decades. 5 years beyond the October War, the first of Arab countries, Egypt, signs a peace treaty with Israel. A year after that, the Islamic Revolution in Iran destabilizes the region by creating a new threat to the existing Arab regimes. 2 years later, the Iran-Iraq War reduces a strong and developing Arab regional player into a shadow of itself. Another 2 years later, and Iraq invades Kuwait, leading to a long-term presence of the US military in the region. 3 years later, another Arab nation crumbles and signs a peace treaty with Israel, the Kingdom of Jordan. A couple of years later, and the American-generated a clean break strategy on behalf of the Zionists introduces a method of destroying the most powerful of Arab and Muslim nations in the Middle East through destabilization and all-out wars: Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, and Iran. All leading up to today, when the Arab world is more unstable, divided, and weakened beyond measure, almost akin to its mandate or protectorate days, when the possibility of a unity as a political, economic, or military collective appears remote and so far away, when the proposition of strength in numbers has disappeared into the bin of false hopes. And with this reality exists in practice, Western imperialism all over again, just as it was in the post-World War I era. So many negative moments along history have come about to the Arab world since 1973. If one fails to link this terrible year as a cause for subsequent derailments of nations and their development, then they either don't want to make the effort in analyzing the events that took shape after 1973, or are simply naive to the alternative plans that evolved from a moment of fear, doubt, and helplessness, as in how Israel and the United States felt after the events of the year. Indeed, 1973 was a very bad year for Arabs. But what are your thoughts? What year do you think might carry the heavier weight and burden on Arabs today? Let me know with your insights and the sharing of your comments.